My name is Avery, and I am 36 years old. I never expected to open the door of my luxury beachfront home to find the family who had excluded me for 12 long years standing on my doorstep. There they were, my mother Stephanie, my stepfather Carter, my stepsister Donna, and her husband Malachi, all staring at me with a mixture of awe and discomfort. I invited them in calmly, watching as their eyes widened at the marble floors and ocean views. The color drained from their faces when I said what I said next. But before I continue with what happened next, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. While you're at it, hit that like and subscribe button so you don't miss any more true life stories about family betrayal and personal triumph. My early childhood was what many would consider picture perfect. I lived with my mother Stephanie and my father Nathan in a modest but comfortable home in the suburbs of Boston. Dad worked as an engineer for a construction company, while Mom taught at the local elementary school. Their love for each other was evident in every small gesture. The way Dad would leave little notes in Mom's lunch bag, how she would straighten his tie each morning before he left for work, the secret smiles they shared across the dinner table. Our weekends were filled with adventures that cost little but meant everything. Trips to the park where Dad would push me on the swings until my legs ached from laughing. Movie nights with homemade popcorn where we'd huddle together on our old couch debating whether the hero would save the day. Sunday dinners where Dad would grill in the backyard regardless of the weather, claiming that every season had its own special flavor to add to the food. I remember how he would stand there in the snow during winter, spatula in hand, his breath creating small clouds in the frigid air. "Snow adds a crisp freshness to the burgers," he declared with complete seriousness, while Mom and I giggled from the warm kitchen window. Mom would always respond by making hot chocolate with extra marshmallows, and we'd drink it while Dad stamped his feet to warm up, still insisting that outdoor grilling was superior in every season. These weren't just meals to us. They were rituals that bound our small family together. Dad would tell stories about his workday, making even the most mundane engineering problems sound like epic adventures. He'd describe how he'd solved a structural issue or helped design a new building, his eyes lighting up as he explained the technical details in ways that somehow made perfect sense to a young girl. Mom would share funny things her students had said, often imitating their voices until we were all laughing so hard we could barely eat. The way she described little Tommy's creative excuse for not doing homework or Sarah's unique interpretation of a math problem made me feel like I knew her entire class personally. And I would chatter endlessly about school, my friends, my dreams for the future, knowing that every word I spoke was treasured by these two people who loved me unconditionally. Dad would ask thoughtful questions about my day, remembering details about tests I was worried about or friends I'd mentioned. Mom would help me with projects, staying up late to help me build a volcano for science class or practice lines for the school play. Every night before bed, Dad would tell me stories about brave little girls who grew up to change the world. Sometimes these girls were princesses who saved kingdoms through cleverness rather than magic, using their intelligence to solve problems that had stumped entire armies. Other times they were ordinary children who discovered extraordinary talents within themselves. A girl who could talk to animals and use this gift to prevent environmental disasters. Or a young inventor whose creations helped people in ways no one had imagined. The stories varied in setting and plot, but they always featured young women who overcame obstacles through determination, kindness, and intelligence. Dad would weave details from my own life into these tales, creating characters who shared my curiosity, my love of reading, my stubborn streak that drove me to keep trying when things got difficult. He would always end with the same phrase, spoken in a voice full of conviction and love. "And one day, Avery, that will be you." I believed him with all my heart, not just because he was my father, but because when he looked at me, I could see my own potential reflected in his eyes. He saw greatness in me before I even knew what greatness might look like. When I brought home good grades, both my parents celebrated like I had won an Olympic medal. Dad would swing me around the kitchen, lifting me high into the air while I squealed with delight, both of us laughing until our sides hurt. Mom would immediately start planning my favorite dessert, usually chocolate chip cookies that we'd bake together, measuring the ingredients carefully and stealing tastes of cookie dough when Dad pretended not to be looking. They made me feel like I could accomplish anything, like every achievement, no matter how small, was worthy of celebration and pride. When I learned to ride my bike without training wheels, they both ran alongside me cheering. When I got the lead in the school play, they invited the neighbors to come watch. When I won the spelling bee, Dad took a half day off work to be there, and Mom cried happy tears in the audience. Our house was filled with warmth, with laughter echoing from room to room, with music playing softly during dinner, with the sound of pages turning as we read together in the evenings. Dad would help me with my math homework at the kitchen table, his patient explanations turning confusing problems into solvable puzzles. He never made me feel stupid when I didn't understand something right away, instead finding new ways to explain concepts until they clicked. Mom would read with me every night, her voice bringing characters to life in ways that made me fall in love with storytelling. She'd do different voices for each character, and we'd discuss the plots and predict what might happen next. Those bedtime stories weren't just about entertainment. They were about connection, about sharing imagination and wonder. Looking back now, I realize how rare that kind of security was. We weren't wealthy by any measure. Our furniture was secondhand, carefully selected from garage sales and thrift stores. Our car was older, requiring Dad's weekend attention to keep it running smoothly. Our vacations were camping trips rather than exotic destinations, but those camping trips were magical to me. We'd roast marshmallows over campfires, tell ghost stories that were scary enough to be thrilling, but not so scary that I'd have nightmares, and fall asleep to the sound of Dad and Mom talking quietly outside our tent. But we were rich in the ways that truly mattered. I felt valued every single day. My opinions sought and respected even when they were childish or impractical. I felt protected, knowing that these two people would face any danger to keep me safe. Most importantly, I felt loved unconditionally, not for what I achieved or how I behaved, but simply for being their daughter. I knew without question that these two people would move mountains for me if necessary. When I was scared, they comforted me. When I was excited, they shared my joy. When I made mistakes, they helped me learn from them without making me feel ashamed. This was love in its purest form, consistent, reliable, and unwavering. Everything changed when I was 12 years old.
The move to Carter's house happened just 2 weeks after their wedding. A small ceremony at City Hall that felt more like a business transaction than a celebration of love. I wore a dress Mom had bought for me, standing awkwardly beside them as they exchanged vows, feeling like an intruder at someone else's private moment. There was no reception, no family gathering, just the four of us going to dinner at an upscale restaurant where I felt completely out of place. Carter's house was everything ours hadn't been. Large, modern, immaculate. It sat in a neighborhood where every lawn was perfectly manicured, and every car in every driveway looked like it had just been detailed. The interior was decorated in neutral tones, with expensive furniture that looked like it belonged in a magazine rather than a home where people actually lived. From the beginning, Donna made it clear that she wasn't interested in having a little sister. She was preparing for college and considered me an annoying child who was invading her space. The first time I knocked on her bedroom door to introduce myself, she barely looked up from her magazine, some glossy publication about celebrities and fashion that seemed to hold her complete attention. "Look," she said, flipping a page with deliberate slowness, not bothering to make eye contact. Let's just be clear about something right from the start. We're not going to be sisters. Our parents might be married, but that doesn't make us family. Stay out of my room, stay out of my business, and we'll get along fine. Her tone was matter-of-fact, as if she were explaining house rules to a new roommate, rather than speaking to a grieving 13-year-old who had just lost everything familiar. I wanted to tell her that I hadn't asked to be her sister, that I missed my real family, that I was just trying to be polite. Instead, I mumbled an apology and backed away from her door. I retreated to my new bedroom, which was larger than my old one, but felt cold and sterile. The walls were painted a generic beige, and the furniture, a bed, desk, and dresser, looked like it had been ordered from a catalog specifically for guest rooms. There were no dents in the walls from where Dad had hung my growth chart, marking my height each birthday with a pencil line and the date. No familiar stains on the carpet from art projects gone wrong or science experiments that had gotten out of hand. No sense of history or love in any corner. This wasn't home. It was just a house where I now lived, a place where I was expected to be grateful for the privilege of existing in someone else's space. Carter wasn't cruel in obvious ways, but he never tried to be a father to me either. He was polite but distant, treating me more like a house guest who had overstayed their welcome than a new daughter. His interactions with me were limited to practical matters, reminders about household rules, questions about my school schedule, corrections to my behavior when I failed to meet his standards. But with Donna, he was completely different. His face would light up when she entered a room. He remembered every detail of her stories about college friends and professors. When she announced she had been accepted to her college of choice, a prestigious university with ivy-covered buildings and a reputation for excellence, Carter threw an elaborate party with catered food and dozens of guests. The celebration filled the house with laughter and congratulations. Carter gave a speech about his brilliant daughter and how proud he was of her accomplishments. Photos were taken of the proud father with his achieving daughter. When I won the science fair that same year, a competition I'd been working toward for months, staying late after school to perfect my project about renewable energy sources, Carter's response was markedly different. I burst through the front door, excited to share my victory, holding my blue ribbon and small trophy. "I won first place," I announced to the living room where Carter was reading his newspaper and Mom was folding laundry. Carter looked up briefly, glanced at my ribbon, and nodded. "That's nice," he said, before returning to his newspaper. "Make sure you put that away somewhere safe so it doesn't get lost." Mom smiled and said she was proud of me, but her attention quickly returned to the laundry. There was no celebration, no photos, no calls to relatives to share the good news. My achievement was treated as a minor inconvenience, something to be acknowledged and quickly forgotten. What hurt most was watching Mom change in ways both subtle and profound. She had always been my champion, the one person who knew me better than anyone, who could read my moods and understand my thoughts before I even spoke them. But around Carter, she became someone different, more concerned with appearances, more focused on maintaining harmony at any cost, less patient with my questions and needs. When Carter criticized my table manners, apparently I chewed too loudly or my posture wasn't acceptable, Mom would give me a look that said, "Just do what he says." When he made comments about my clothing choices, suggesting I needed to dress more appropriately for a young lady, Mom would nod in agreement instead of defending my right to wear comfortable clothes.
When I tried to talk to her alone about how I was feeling, about how strange and unwelcome I felt in this new house, she would brush me off with responses that felt rehearsed. "We're all adjusting, Avery. This is hard for everyone. Please try harder to fit in." But I was trying. I was trying so hard that it exhausted me. I walked on eggshells, constantly monitoring my behavior to avoid Carter's disapproval. I kept my room spotless, completed my chores without being asked, maintained perfect grades, and stayed out of everyone's way as much as possible. Yet nothing I did seemed to earn me a place in this new family structure. Dinners in our new home were particularly painful experiences. Carter would dominate the conversation, talking extensively about his real estate business, the deals he was negotiating, the clients he was impressing, the money he was making. He'd discuss Donna's accomplishments at college, reading parts of her emails aloud, and analyzing every professor's comment as if she was destined for greatness. If I tried to contribute to these conversations, sharing something interesting I learned in school or mentioning a book I was reading, Carter would often interrupt me mid-sentence or simply talk over me as if I hadn't spoken at all. Mom would give me small smiles of encouragement from across the table, but she rarely spoke up on my behalf, rarely redirected the conversation to include me. I learned to eat quickly and ask to be excused, retreating to my room where I could exist without feeling like I was constantly failing some test I didn't understand. In my old life, dinner time had been our favorite part of the day, a time for sharing, laughing, and connecting. Now, it was something to endure.
I kept a journal during those years, pouring my thoughts and feelings onto its pages since I had no one to talk to. One entry from that time reads, "Sometimes I wonder if I would disappear completely. Would anyone in this house even notice I was gone?" My relationship with Mom had deteriorated to the point where our conversations were limited to practical matters: what time dinner would be, whether I needed new school supplies, reminders about chores. The mother who had once known my every thought and feeling now seemed like a stranger who happened to live in the same house. The real breaking point came during my junior year of high school. I was researching colleges and needed to know exactly how much money was available in my college fund. Dad had always talked about how he was saving for my education, and even though we weren't wealthy, I knew he had put aside a significant amount. I gathered my courage and approached Carter one evening while he was working in his home office. I knocked on the door frame and he looked up with irritation. "What is it, Avery? I'm busy." "I wanted to ask about my college fund," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "The one my dad set up for me. I need to know how much is in it for planning purposes." Carter leaned back in his chair, a strange expression crossing his face. "That money has been reallocated," he said finally. "Reallocated? What does that mean?" "It means the money isn't there anymore. We needed it for Donna's tuition and some investments for the family. Your mother agreed to it." The room seemed to tilt beneath my feet. "But that was my money. Dad left it specifically for my education." Carter's face hardened. "Listen carefully, Avery. While you live under my roof, you don't get to question my financial decisions. That money was used for this family, our family. The fact that you even bring this up shows how ungrateful you are for everything we've provided for you." I stood there, stunned into silence. Not only had they taken what was rightfully mine, but I was being called ungrateful for even asking about it. I turned and walked out of his office, my mind racing. I needed to talk to Mom.
I found her in the kitchen preparing dinner. When I told her what Carter had said, I expected shock, outrage, some indication that this had been done without her knowledge. Instead, she sighed and avoided my eyes. Carter knows what's best for our family finances, Avery. Donna's university is very expensive, and there was some business opportunities that needed investment. But that was Dad's money from me. How could you let him take it? Don't be so dramatic, Mom said, her voice taking on that defensive tone she always used when discussing Carter. You can get student loans like everyone else, or maybe consider community college. In that moment, I realized I was truly alone. My own mother had chosen her new family over me, had allowed them to steal what my father had worked so hard to provide for my future. It was the final betrayal. The next 2 years in that house were a special kind of hell. I became a ghost, coming and going silently, interacting as little as possible with Carter, Donna during her visits home, and even Mom. I worked part-time jobs, saving every penny I could, and applied for every scholarship available. My plan was simple: leave as soon as I graduated and never look back. During my senior year, Donna got engaged to Malachi, a young businessman she had met at college. He came from money and had started his own company right after graduation. Carter was ecstatic, declaring Malachi the son he never had. The wedding planning consumed the household, with Mom and Carter spending thousands of dollars on what Carter called the social event of the season. I was assigned various wedding tasks: running errands, addressing envelopes, picking up items from vendors, not because Donna wanted my help, but because Carter insisted I contribute to the family. During the actual wedding, I was seated at a table far from the family with distant relatives no one else wanted to deal with. When the photographer called for family photos, I was not included. The wedding was lavish and excessive, held at an exclusive country club with hundreds of guests. Donna looked beautiful in her designer gown, and Malachi appeared every inch the successful businessman in his tailored tuxedo. As I watched them exchange vows, I couldn't help but wonder what my future would hold. Would anyone ever love me the way Malachi seemed to love Donna? Would I ever feel like I belonged somewhere again? After the wedding, a new tradition began. Once a month, the family would gather for dinner. My mother, Carter, Donna, and Malachi. Sometimes extended family would join as well. Photos of these gatherings would appear on social media, everyone smiling and looking perfect. I was never invited. Not once in all those years did anyone think to include me in these family reunions. I would learn about them after the fact, seeing the pictures online or hearing Mom mention them in passing. Each time the message was clear: I was not considered part of the family. The day I graduated high school was bright and sunny, a perfect June morning. As I sat among my classmates in my cap and gown, I scanned the audience for familiar faces. My mother had promised to come, though Carter had a business obligation that day. As the ceremony progressed, I kept looking, hoping to see her somewhere in the crowd. She never arrived. After the ceremony, as other students celebrated with their families, I stood alone, holding my diploma. Mrs. Henderson, my favorite English teacher, approached me with a warm smile. "Congratulations, Avery. Highest GPA in the class. That's quite an achievement." "Thank you," I said, trying to keep the disappointment from my voice. Mrs. Henderson looked around. "Is no one here for you today?" I shrugged, attempting to appear nonchalant. They had other commitments. Something in her expression changed as she studied my face. "Walk with me for a moment, would you?" As we strolled across the emptying field, Mrs. Henderson told me that she had been watching my academic progress for years and was impressed not just by my intelligence, but by my determination. She had also noticed that I seemed to have little support at home. I graduated from Westridge University, she said. They have an excellent scholarship program for students like you, bright, hardworking, and independent. The application deadline has passed, but I took the liberty of contacting my former professor who sits on the admissions committee. If you're interested, there's still a chance. That conversation changed the trajectory of my life. With Mrs. Henderson's guidance, I applied for the scholarship and was accepted to Westridge University with enough financial aid to cover most of my tuition. The housing and remaining expenses would be a challenge, but I was determined to make it work. When I returned home that day, I found my mother and Carter watching television in the living room. Neither asked about the graduation ceremony. I got accepted to Westridge University, I announced, standing in the doorway. I received a scholarship. Westridge, Carter scoffed without looking away from the television. That's an expensive private school. Scholarship or not, you can't afford that. I will be attending, I said firmly, and I will be moving out next month.
That got their attention. Mom looked up, her expression a mixture of surprise and something else. Guilt, perhaps. Moving out? Don't be ridiculous, Avery. Where would you go? How would you support yourself? Her voice held a note of panic. I've been saving for my jobs. I have enough for a security deposit on a shared apartment near campus. I've already found roommates, other students. The truth was, I had been planning this escape for over a year, meticulously saving and researching my options. Carter stood up, his face reddening. This is absurd. You're not prepared to live on your own. You'll come crawling back within a month when you realize how difficult the real world is. I already know how difficult the world is, I replied, surprised by my own calmness. I've been living in a house where I'm treated like an unwelcome guest for 6 years. I think I'll manage. The argument that followed was ugly. Carter called me ungrateful, dramatic, foolish. Mom alternated between pleading with me to reconsider and defending Carter when I pointed out how I'd been treated. At one point, I asked directly about my college fund, and Carter stormed out of the room. The day I left, Mom helped me carry my bags to the car, an old Honda Civic I'd purchased with my savings. As I prepared to drive away, she hugged me awkwardly. The door is always open if you need to come back, though her eyes darted toward the house where Carter waited. Is it really, Mom? I asked quietly. She had no answer for that. My first year at Westridge was incredibly difficult. I worked 2 part-time jobs while carrying a full course load. My apartment was shared with 3 other students in a rundown building far from campus, meaning long bus rides and from classes. There were nights when I went to bed hungry because I had to choose between food and textbooks. I was exhausted, lonely, and sometimes wondered if Carter had been right about me failing on my own. But I didn't fail. Each semester, I earned top grades, despite my challenging circumstances. I learned to budget every penny, to find free resources on campus, to survive on minimal sleep when necessary. And slowly, I began to build a new life for myself. The turning point came when I met Melissa in my sophomore year. We were paired for a project in our computer science class, and her friendly, straightforward manner broke through the protective walls I'd built around myself. Melissa came from a loving, supportive family and seemed genuinely baffled by my estrangement from mine. Family is supposed to lift you up, not tear you down, she said after I finally shared some of my story with her. You deserved better, Avery.
Those simple words of validation meant more to me than she could ever know. Melissa became my first real friend in years, and eventually she introduced me to her family who welcomed me warmly. Spending holidays with them showed me what a healthy family dynamic looked like, making the contrast with my own upbringing even more stark. During our junior year, I discovered my talent for developing mobile applications. What started as a class project evolved into something more, as I recognized the gap in the market for an app that would help students manage their time and resources effectively. I spent countless hours coding and refining my idea, often working through the night after finishing my paid jobs and homework. "You should pursue this after graduation," Melissa urged after seeing my prototype. "This could be huge, Avery. It's solving a real problem." When graduation approached, I was recruited by several tech companies offering competitive salaries and benefits. It was tempting. The security of a regular paycheck, health insurance, and stability was appealing after years of financial struggle. But my app concept had evolved into a comprehensive platform, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to see it through. In a decision that terrified and exhilarated me in equal measure, I declined the job offers and committed to launching my own company. Melissa thought I was brave. Others thought I was crazy. But for the first time in my life, I was making a choice purely for myself, based on my own vision and desires. Whatever the outcome, that alone felt like victory. The first year after graduation was a blur of 18-hour days, instant ramen, and moments of alternating elation and despair. I had rented a tiny studio apartment that doubled as my office, sleeping on a futon that I folded up each morning to make space for my work. My savings were dwindling rapidly, but I was making progress on the app development. The breakthrough came when I presented my prototype at a local tech meetup. After my demonstration, a man approached me, introduced himself as Max Foster, and handed me his business card. He was an angel investor looking for promising startups, and something about my presentation had caught his attention. "Your concept is solid," he said during our first official meeting, "but what impressed me most was your understanding of the user experience. You clearly know your target audience because you've lived their challenges." Max offered to invest $50,000 in exchange for a 20% stake in my company. It wasn't a huge amount by tech startup standards, but it was enough to keep me afloat while I refined the product and prepared for launch. More importantly, Max became a mentor, guiding me through the business aspects I was less familiar with and introducing me to his network of industry contacts. The app launched 6 months later, and the response exceeded my wildest expectations. College students across the country downloaded it, and positive reviews poured in. Revenue from the premium version allowed me to hire my first employees, a developer to help with updates and new features, and a marketing specialist to expand our reach. By the end of the second year, we had expanded to a proper office space and a team of 12 people. Managing others was a new challenge for me. I had never seen myself as a leader, but I discovered that my experiences had given me valuable insights. I knew how it felt to be dismissed and undervalued, so I created a company culture where every voice was heard and respected. I understood financial insecurity, so I ensured fair compensation and benefits for my team. As the company grew, so did the challenges. There were competitors who tried to copy our features, technical issues that required all-night problem-solving sessions, and the constant pressure to innovate and stay relevant. But through it all, I found that I thrived under pressure. The girl who had once felt invisible was now making decisions that affected dozens of employees and thousands of users. 5 years after leaving my mother's house, I sold my company to a larger tech firm for a sum that still seems unreal when I think about it as that lonely teenager planning her escape.
One of the first things I did with my new financial freedom was purchase my dream home, a modern beachfront property with floor-to-ceiling windows that filled every room with light and the constant sound of waves. The house was probably excessive for one person, with its 5 bedrooms and expansive open living spaces, but after years of cramped apartments and shared housing, I wanted space that was entirely mine. Standing on the deck overlooking the ocean that first evening, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Pride in what I had accomplished, certainly, but also a lingering sadness for the family connections I had lost, or more accurately, never really had. Success was sweet, but it couldn't fill the void left by years of rejection and isolation. That realization led me to seek therapy, something I'd resisted despite Melissa's gentle suggestions over the years. I'd always prided myself on my self-sufficiency, viewing the need for help as weakness. But now I understood that healing from my past was necessary if I wanted to fully enjoy my present and future. Dr. Weber, my therapist, helped me process the abandonment and betrayal I'd experienced. "What happened wasn't your fault," she told me during one particularly difficult session. "You were a child who deserved protection and support. The adults in your life failed you, not the other way around." Gradually, I learned to separate my self-worth from my family's treatment of me. I recognized that their behavior reflected their own limitations and flaws, not my value as a person. This understanding didn't erase the pain, but it made it more manageable. As part of my healing process, I established a scholarship foundation for students from difficult family backgrounds. The Avery Foundation provided not just financial assistance, but also mentoring and emotional support for young people who, like me, were trying to build lives without family backing. Working with these students gave purpose to my pain and reminded me that even the most difficult experiences could be transformed into something positive. Throughout these years of growth and success, my relationship with my family remained non-existent. I sent Christmas and birthday cards to my mother each year, usually receiving a brief text message in return. Occasionally, I would see social media posts about family gatherings, Carter and Mom celebrating their anniversary, Donna and Malachi buying a new home, holiday celebrations that looked perfect in filtered photos. I was never invited to any of these events, never included in what they considered family. Sometimes late at night, I would wonder what they thought had become of me. Did they ever worry? Did they ever regret the way they treated me? Or was I simply a chapter they had closed, a person they preferred to forget? I had no answers to these questions, and most days I convinced myself I no longer cared. But deep down, there remained a small, wounded part of me that still yearned for the family I'd never truly had. That part of me watched the happy families at the beach near my home with a mixture of warmth and wistfulness. That part of me sometimes dreamed of reconciliation, of healing, of being welcomed with open arms by the people who should have loved me all along. That was the part of me that felt a jolt of recognition when, 12 years after I had left home, I heard the doorbell ring on a quiet Sunday afternoon and opened the door to find them standing there. My mother, Carter, Donna, and Malachi, looking both familiar and like strangers all at once. The doorbell echoed through my house, interrupting a peaceful Sunday afternoon of reading on my deck. I wasn't expecting anyone, and few people knew where I lived. I valued my privacy and kept my address confidential. Curious and slightly annoyed, I made my way to the front door, tucking my hair behind my ears and straightening my casual sweater. Nothing could have prepared me for the sight that greeted me when I opened the door. There they stood, like apparitions from another life. My mother, Carter, Donna, and Malachi. For a moment, I thought I might be hallucinating, that perhaps I'd fallen asleep while reading and this was some strange dream conjured by my subconscious. My mother looked older than her 62 years. Her once vibrant brown hair was now gray and cut in a severe bob.
She wore an expensive-looking outfit that seemed at odds with the anxiety in her eyes. Carter stood beside her, still tall, but no longer imposing. His confident posture had been replaced by a slight stoop, and the hair that he had once meticulously styled was thin and receding. Donna, now 36, had maintained her polished appearance, though her designer clothes couldn't hide the tension in her shoulders and the tight lines around her mouth. Malachi stood slightly apart from the others, his expression unreadable behind a forced smile. "Avery," my mother said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's been so long." I stood frozen in the doorway, 1,000 emotions rushing through me at once. Shock, confusion, anger, curiosity, all competing for dominance. But years of business negotiations had taught me to maintain my composure in unexpected situations. "Yes," I replied evenly. 12 years, to be exact. An uncomfortable silence followed as they seemed to wait for me to say more, to ask why they were there perhaps, or to express joy at seeing them. I did neither, simply waiting with one hand still on the door. Finally, Carter cleared his throat. "This is quite a home you have here. The neighborhood is very exclusive. Would you like to come in?" I asked, not out of warmth, but because standing in the doorway felt awkward, and I preferred to understand the purpose of this unexpected visit sooner rather than later. They filed past me into the foyer, their eyes widening as they took in the soaring ceilings, the marble floors, the glass walls revealing the ocean view. I led them to the living room, gesturing for them to sit on the sectional sofa while I took a chair opposite them. "Can I offer you something to drink? Water, coffee, tea?" My voice sounded strange to my own ears, formal and detached, as if I were hosting business associates rather than family. "Water's fine, thank you," my mother said, and the others nodded in agreement. I went to the kitchen, grateful for a moment alone to collect my thoughts. As I filled glasses with filtered water and arranged them on a tray, I took several deep breaths. Whatever their reason for appearing after all these years, I would not allow them to see how much their presence affected me. I would not give them that power. When I returned, I found them huddled in conversation that abruptly ceased as I entered. I distributed the water and resumed my seat, crossing my legs and meeting their gazes directly. "So," I said, "what brings you here after all this time? And how did you find my address?" My mother and Carter exchanged glances before she answered. "We saw an article about you in Business Insider. It mentioned you lived in this area, and we hired someone to find the exact address." She at least had the grace to look embarrassed about this admission. "That was resourceful," I replied, my tone neutral. "You've done very well for yourself," Donna interjected, gesturing to the room around us. "Your company is quite successful from what we've read." "It is," I agreed, "though I'm surprised you've been following my career." Another uncomfortable silence fell. I sipped my water and waited. They had sought me out. Let them explain why. "Avery," my mother finally said, leaning forward, "we wanted to reconnect. It's been too long, and we're family, after all." "Family," I repeated, the word feeling foreign on my tongue. "That's an interesting choice of word." Carter shifted in his seat, noting the sheen of sweat on his forehead despite the comfortable temperature in the room. "Move forward," I echoed. "And what does that look like to you, Carter?" The conversation continued in this strained manner for nearly an hour. They asked superficial questions about my life, my work, my home. I answered politely, but offered no details beyond what they specifically asked. They shared equally superficial updates about their lives. Donna and Malachi's 10th wedding anniversary, my mother's retirement from teaching, and Carter's scaled-back involvement in his real estate business.
What they didn't mention was the 12 years of silence, the family gatherings I hadn't been invited to, the major life events they hadn't shared with me, the complete absence of any attempt to contact me until now. We danced around these glaring omissions, maintaining a facade of civility that grew more strained with each passing minute. It was when I offered to show them the deck overlooking the ocean that the real purpose of their visit began to emerge. As we stood admiring the view, Malachi casually mentioned his new business venture, a tech startup that was showing great promise but needed additional investment. "The timing in the market hasn't been ideal," he said, his eyes fixed on the horizon rather than meeting mine. "We're in a bit of a cash flow situation. Temporarily, of course." "That sounds challenging," I replied, deliberately obtuse. Donna placed her hand on her stomach, a gesture I hadn't noticed earlier. "We're expecting our first child," she announced, her voice softening for the first time since they'd arrived. "Due in 4 months. Congratulations." I meant it, genuinely, despite everything. A child deserved only good wishes, regardless of its parents.
For the first month after their visit, I heard nothing from any of them. I wasn't surprised. Carter had always been proud, and my refusal to simply hand over money must have stung. I wondered occasionally about my mother, whether she had meant what she said, or if her apology had been another attempt to manipulate me. I tried not to dwell on these thoughts, focusing instead on my work and the Scholarship Foundation, which was preparing to announce its newest recipients. Then, 6 weeks after their visit, I received an email from my mother. It was brief but heartfelt, apologizing again for the past and asking if we could talk by phone sometime. I responded with my number and suggested a time later that week. Our first conversation was awkward, filled with long pauses and careful words. But it was a start. We agreed to talk again the following week, and slowly a pattern emerged. Our weekly calls became a fixture in both our lives, a chance to cautiously build something new from the ashes of our former relationship. During one of these calls, 3 months after her visit, my mother revealed that she and Carter were seeing a marriage counselor. "Things haven't been good between us for years," she admitted. "I think I've been afraid to acknowledge how unhappy I've been, afraid of being alone again, like after your father died." It was the first time she had mentioned my father in years, and the reference opened a door to conversations about him, about the happy years before his death, about memories I had feared were mine alone. These shared recollections became a bridge between us, connecting our present to a past that hadn't been entirely painful. Around the same time, I received a surprise email from Malachi. Despite Carter's anger, he had taken me up on my offer to review his business plan. The document he sent was actually quite solid. His idea had merit, but his execution and financial planning needed work. I spent a weekend annotating the plan with suggestions and questions, then sent it back with an offer to connect him with some contacts in the industry who might provide guidance. His grateful response led to a series of professional exchanges that gradually became more personal. Through Malachi, I learned that Donna had given birth to a baby girl they had named Lily. He sent a photo of the infant, tiny and perfect in her hospital blanket. I sent a gift basket, but maintained my boundaries, making it clear that while I was open to rebuilding relationships, I wouldn't be providing the financial bailout they had initially sought. Carter remained distant, refusing to speak to me during my calls with my mother and declining to attend when she suggested meeting for lunch during one of my business trips to their city. His pride, it seemed, would not allow him to accept the new terms of our relationship. I found that I could live with this. Some wounds were perhaps too deep to heal, some bridges burned beyond repair. What surprised me most during this period of cautious reconciliation was how my own feelings evolved. The anger that had once burned so hot within me gradually cooled, replaced by a kind of detached compassion. I could see now that Carter's controlling behavior likely stemmed from his own insecurities, that my mother's failure to protect me was rooted in her fear of being alone again, like after your father died. Understanding these dynamics didn't excuse their actions, but it helped me contextualize them. They were flawed people who made harmful choices, not monsters who had set out to destroy me. This realization didn't make the past hurt less, but it did make the weight of it easier to carry. 6 months after their unexpected appearance at my door, I expanded the Avery Foundation to include a new program specifically designed to help young adults aging out of foster care or leaving difficult family situations. The program provided not just financial support, but also mentoring, life skills training, and therapy. Working with these young people, hearing their stories and witnessing their resilience brought healing I hadn't known I still needed. During the Foundation's annual gala, I shared parts of my own story publicly for the first time. Standing at the podium, looking out at the faces of donors, scholarship recipients, and community partners, I spoke about the pain of family rejection, the struggle to build a life without support, and the journey toward healing and success. The most profound lesson I've learned, I told the audience, is that forgiveness isn't something you do for others. It's something you do for yourself. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or excusing harmful behavior. It means releasing the hold that behavior has on your present and future. I paused, looking around the room at the young people whose lives the Foundation was helping to transform. And perhaps more importantly, I've learned that family isn't just about blood or legal ties. Family is about who shows up for you, who celebrates your victories and supports you through defeats. Family is about consistency, respect, and love in action, not just in words. After the gala, as I was saying goodbye to guests, I was surprised to see my mother waiting quietly near the exit. She had not told me she was coming, but there she was, her eyes red from crying during my speech. I'm so proud of you, Avery, not just for your success, but for who you've become, despite everything, despite us. We embraced, and in that moment, I felt something shift within me, a piece of my heart that had remained guarded, relaxing its vigilance just a little. The road ahead would not be easy. Trust once broken takes time to rebuild. Relationships once damaged require care and intention to heal. There would be setbacks and difficult conversations, old hurts resurfacing and new boundaries being tested. Carter might never come around. Donna and I might never be close. My relationship with my mother would likely always bear the scars of our past. But I had learned that healing isn't about erasing wounds. It's about growing around them. It's about building a life so full and meaningful that the painful parts of your story become just that, parts, not the whole. It's about recognizing that while you cannot change the past, you have immense power to shape your present and future. As I stand on my deck today, watching the endless rhythm of the waves, I am at peace with my journey. The abandoned child, the struggling student, the determined entrepreneur, the wounded daughter, the successful businesswoman, all of these are parts of me, threads in the tapestry of who I have become. I no longer try to cut away the painful threads. I simply weave more beautiful ones alongside them, creating a picture that grows richer and more complex with time. Perhaps the most profound truth I have discovered is that sometimes our greatest strength emerges from our deepest wounds. The very experiences that could have broken me instead became the foundation upon which I built a life of purpose, abundance, and authentic connection. In learning to heal myself, I found my calling in helping others heal too. What about you? Has there been a time in your life when rejection or betrayal eventually led to unexpected growth? Or a moment when setting boundaries, though difficult, ultimately set you free? Share your experiences in the comments below. I believe our stories have power, especially when shared with others who might be walking similar paths. If this story resonated with you, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing to hear more journeys of resilience and transformation. And if you know someone who might find comfort or inspiration in these words, sharing is one of the kindest gifts you can give. Thank you for listening to my story. Remember, no matter what challenges you face or what wounds you carry, you have within you the capacity to heal, to grow, and to create a life that makes you proud. This is Avery wishing you strength on your own journey of becoming.